This is Yvonne Wilson Graham, the daughter of Julia Gasky Wilson.
Julia Gasky Wilson. My parents, Charles Franklin Gasky and Ruth Dennis. I was the first of 7 children, 3 brothers and 3 sisters.
Where were you born, Mother?
Salisbury, North Carolina, May 20th, 1912.
Mother, tell me about your first little love affair when you were a little girl.
I was 3 years old. We were still living on Shaver Street where I was born. His name was Curtis, and he was 3. We kept escaping through the gates so we could get together and rub noses. And finally my mother had Daddy to put a lock on the gate, so we stood nose to nose at the fence gate until we rubbed all the grass off on our side and my side of the fence. Finally he moved away and I never saw him anymore, but that was my first love affair.
Tell me when you first started going down to little grandma's house, little grandma Gasky.
I went there, I suppose, from the day I was born. That was my father's mother. They owned a farm, 140 acres of good, rich farming land in Rowan County. The happiest days I think of my life were spent out there on the farm in summers with her. Everything my uncles did, I thought I had to do too. They fixed me a little hoe, and one day they were going to chop cotton. I didn't know what chopping cotton was, but I had to go with them. Grandma made me put my bonnet on. We didn't, back then you were careful with the sun, like we're not very careful now. We chopped cotton all day. I didn't know you were supposed to thin the cotton. We came into the well house, and Grandma said, "Well, how did she do?" And my uncle said she was a poor whore. It was years before anybody told me why they fell on the ground laughing. I was wanting to be a country girl and tried every way I could. We had some corn shuckings out there, and I was a part of that. Helped Grandma with the churn, helped her gather vegetables, hung out cottage cheese on a tree to drain.
What about the time when didn't you go to Texas?
Yeah.
And go swimming with some of your cousins?
Yeah.
Tell me about that, Mom.
Well, I went to Texas first with my grandmother and mother when I was only a year old. Came very near to being tossed into the Mississippi River as we crossed on a ferry. The screens were rotten, and the story goes my mother grabbed me as I was trying to break the screen out going through it. I learned later, because my died out there the year before. She was the only one of her family who stayed in North Carolina. She had 1 sister and 5 brothers, and the parents all moved to Texas because of the land grants, where they changed their name back to Gasky, the French spelling. Since my grandfather was French, my little grandmother was Dutch. There were some good times out there. When I went back, I was 12 years old.
And is that when you went skinny dipping?
Yes, but no skinny dipping then. That was at my grandma's. I went skinny dipping with the tenant farmers' girls. I'll tell you about that. But out there I had two cousins, Leonard and Arthur, and they were going to teach me how to swim. Well, Leonard was full of devilment, and he thought he would hold my head under as a joke. And I was scared to death, thought I was going to drown. I've never liked water since, and I always blamed it on him.
Okay, we're going to go back and pick up with Mother about the skinny dipping.
I was about 10 years old, and there were two tenant farmers on the Grandpa's land. And one day we decided, the 80 girls, we would go to a little branch across the road, and decided that day, for some reason, to take off all our clothes. I was 10 years old. And we got on a rail that went across the little branch, sat on it, and dipping our feet in the water. Didn't know there were water moccasins in it, and I doubt if we would care. We didn't know either that the 80 boys had followed us and took all our clothes up to the road. We didn't know either that my Uncle George, Grandma's youngest brother, child, was hunting in the woods and saw us. He reported to Grandma, and that was the end of my playing with the 80 girls for a long time.
Mother, tell me about the buggy ride you took back to town when you were a little girl. What was that, 5 years old?
I was about 5 years old. I always had to be dragged out from under the bed when I was out there not wanting to go back home. But this particular time, for some reason, I cried so hard that Grandma had my Uncle Robert to hitch up a horse and buggy to take me back to Salisbury, 5 miles, in the middle of the night after they had worked all day in the field. But that was the only time I can remember. After that, I spent most of my summers out there.
Tell me about the time your daddy took you to Washington.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that one in a long time, but President Harding was going to be elected, or, what am I saying? The inauguration was March the 4th. It was very, very cold. I don't know why my daddy wanted to take me back up there. Maybe that started my interest in politics. We stood out on the east side on a large concrete place. There was no fanfare and pomp and circumstance like there is now with an inauguration. It was very cold. Daddy had to hold me on his shoulders so I could see above the crowd. I always remember that for some reason, that trip I took to Washington.
How did y'all go?
We went by train. Daddy was a machinist inspector for Southern Railway. Worked there his whole life with the exception of a short time in 1922 when they had a strike. Daddy worked at that time for the Cheerwine Bottling Company, and we didn't care if he ever went back to work because he brought all the Cheerwine home. Now that company is selling Cheerwine here in Hamlet. And went back into school with my mouth full of gum and got the only X in conduct that I ever made.
What grade did you go up to in that school? Did you say it was 7th?
7th grade there. and then into high school of Knox Boyden High School. We had a red-headed principal there, and he was a good one, but strict. Something we need more than ever today. They were good years, and I enjoyed school. I had several good teachers. Miss Peacock, an English teacher, was similar to the one that my children were privileged to have, Miss Lina Flint, here in Hamlet. But I loved history and English. And then I had a crush on my history teacher. He was a young fella just out of college who was the son of my pastor, Reverend John Fullenwider.
Okay, we'll stop right now and continue our high school years a little later.
This is Grandma. I just want to let you know how my son and my daughter-in-law are doing. And I'll talk to you later. Bye. Well, la-dee-da, Miss Rich Britches and Mr. Rich Britches got an answer sheet, and I do hate the things, but I'm leaving a message. Happy New Year. Bye. A short message. Call me. Bye-bye.